Hey everyone, great to see you. We have the privilege of studying the Haftarah for Parashat uh, Vayigash, which is from the prophet Yecheskel, Ezekiel, chapter 37, verse 15 to verse 28. And I'm going to start this week with a confession, twofold. One is that today's been a very busy day, and I normally look at the Haftarah before I have the opportunity to share it with you, and that did not happen. Um, which brings me to the second part. There are different types of Haftarah that we encounter. Haftarah that are inscrutable a little bit, the language is hard, the narrative has lots of questions. Haftarah that are easier to look at, right? The Hebrew might be easier. There aren't, so many questions in the story. This Haftarah, I would say, is one of the easiest Haftarah to understand and explore, and therefore one that requires us to really think about when we're trying to understand more depth, because some of it's just so obvious. Um, and we'll see what that means. Of course, just for background, our Parsha this week, Parashat Vayigash, details the story of what? What's the primary theme of this Parsha? Anyone? I'll give you a hint. It's the culmination of the book of Bereshit. You have Joseph and his brothers are set up on a collusion course. At the end of last week's Parsha, Yosef drags them all back, and Yehuda is about to speak. What happens? Joseph reveals himself. It's the reunification of his brothers and Yosef, the reforming of the Jewish family, the unity, the harmony, bringing Jacob down to Israel, to Egypt. And so our Haftorah, as we'll see, is very much a similar story, and it's very appropriate for our Parsha. So it's not even like a surface level. The knowledge base of the Parsha is, and the interface with the Haftorah is like perfect. It's hand in glove. Um, why don't we read the story and then we'll situate it. Vayhi Dvar Hashem Elai Lemor. This is the word of God to me saying, right? Who is speaking here? Yecheskel. Who's Yecheskel? He's a prophet during which temple?
Just after or during the destruction of the first temple.
But before the destruction of the first temple, actually. Yecheskel ultimately prophesies the destruction of the temple. The first 24 chapters of Ezekiel, Yecheskel, is all prophecies against the declining, dire, moral and religious decay of Malchei Yehuda, Jewish kings, of the Yehuda, the Judean kings, and ultimately that's the first 20 chapters of it. 25 through 32 is the prophecies against the nations of the world, and the neighboring nations of Israel who subjugate Israel. And then we get nivuot that describe prophecies that describe the destruction of the temple, right? That it will happen at this point. They haven't acted, it will happen. And then we get prophecies of redemption, right? Yecheskel is a mix of downtrodden prophecies to redemption prophecies. And we're introduced to, perhaps most famously, the dry bones prophecy, which is the chapter right before this, or the part right before this, where Yecheskel is brought to a valley of dry bones that represents the Jewish people or the northern kingdoms or this, that, and the other. And he's supposed to prophesy to show that they will come back. So what is our prophet continues? Once you have sort of the individual redemption and the individual revitalization, the individual reliving and breath of new life into the Jewish person, well, what led to exile was the divisiveness. So this is a prophecy about unity. But Vayhi Dvar Hashem Elai Lemor. This is a classical sort of introduction to Yecheskel, to a prophecy. Bata ben Adam, O you, O mortal man, right? And again, Hopefully by now we know. When we see the word Ben Adam, if someone should drop you anywhere in the Tanakh, and it said Bata Ben Adam, you should know that you are looking at the prophet Yecheskel. That is a moniker that only Yecheskel carries, and it is almost. I always interpret it as I interpret it as a derisive um, moniker for Yecheskel, that he's saying, Yecheskel has these awesome visions of God. He sees into the heavens perhaps more than most people do, in such a clear fashion. More than most even prophets do into God's inner workings. He gets so close to the heavenly chariot and the angels, and therefore there's sort of this artificial or literary reminder to Yecheskel, you're not so great. You're a mortal person. Don't think that you're godly. Right? Oh, you, O mortal man. Kach lecha eitz echad. Take for you one either plank or one branch. Uktov alav liyuda livnei Yisrael chavarav. And write on one Yehuda and one for Yisrael. Right? And if you recall, shortly after the stories that we read last week of Shlomo, Shlomo's kingdom is unified for his reign, but his son, the kingdom already breaks. You have the 10 northern tribes in the north of Israel. You have the southern tribes, Yehuda and Shimon, maybe some Levi in the south. And that becomes two kingdoms. It's a split. There's a schism. There's Yiluga Mamlachot. There's separating the kingdoms into two kingdoms. Ultimately, the 10 northern tribes get exiled by Assyria, and they get totally lost. And then you have the southern tribes, which we often talk about, for these Malchei Yehuda, that ultimately also gets exiled. We are all descendants of the northern tribes. I'm sorry, of the southern tribes, and we ultimately come back. But what's the vision? What's the prophecy? Take a plank or a branch and write on it Yehuda and Yisrael. Eitz echad l'ksov alav leYosef. Eitz Ephraim l'chol beis Yisrael chaverav. I'm sorry. Write for it for Yehuda and Beit Yisrael one, and for Ephraim and Yosef number two. Yehuda representing the southern tribes, and Yosef representing the northern tribes. And what we see over here right away is that the schism that exists in the time of the first Jewish Commonwealth, the first temple, that splits the northern and southern kingdoms, is a schism, is a friction, is a fissure that exists in the Jewish people all the way from its inception. Yehuda and Yosef, this intersection, this engagement, this head-on collusion between the two of them, that in our parsha begins to be remedied, but is still that fault line that carries through that ultimately leads to that. Bring them to you, bring them together. They should be one in your hand. Bring them one in your hand. When people see you, right? The prophecy, sometimes a prophet gets rhetoric. They're supposed to go give a speech. Now we're also given a prop, right? Yecheskel is supposed to do this, and he's supposed to have a prop. He's supposed to stand in the public market and do this, and people are going to ask you, Yecheskel, why are you doing this? What is this supposed to mean? Daber alehem ko amar, and give the following prophecy. So says Hashem, Hine ani lokeach at Yosef asher b'yad Ephraim. I'm going to take the tree, the staff, the revitalized Yosef that is in the hands of Ephraim. Well, just gotta scroll down. My career froze. We're great. Ushiftei Yisrael Chavarav, and the northern tribes associated with him, V'natati otam alav et eitz Yehuda, and I'm putting them connected with the staff of Yehuda, of Judah, V'asitim le'etz achad v'yu achad biyadi. And I'm going to make them one staff, and there'll be one in my hands. V'yu ha'etzim asher tichtov aleim biyadecha leinehem. And make sure you show them the sticks before you that you've inscribed to them, Daber alehem, and say to them, Ko amar Hashem, so says God, Hine ani lokachet Yisrael mi ben hagoyim. What? Oh, great. Here I'm taking the Jewish people from Mibein Hagoyim, from between all the other nations, Sham, that you were exiled to, and I'm bringing them back to Israel, El Admatam, until their land. The Asiti Otam Lagoy Echad Ba'aretz. I'm going to make them one nation in the land. Meaning there's a double miracle happening here. There's redemption, which is a miracle. But maybe even a greater miracle is God's bringing all the Jewish people to Israel, and we will be one nation, one unified nation, living in harmony, living in unity. V'harei Yisrael, u'melech echad yeh l'kulam, l'melech, and we'll be one king, we'll all vote for the same person, and we'll all adopt in the same shul. We'll all agree on the same kashrut. We'll all, I mean, these are like fanciful prophecies that you wonder, like, could anyone imagine this happening? Lo the shnei goyim. There won't be two nations. Lo yechatzu mamlachot od, and you won't be divided into two kingdoms anymore. V'lo titamu od begilu lehem. You won't be defiled by all your defilements and all of the sins that are shechatu behem v'tiarti otam, and you'll be pure. Meaning, this redemption is, I'm going to bring the Jews back to Israel. I'm going to unify them. I'm going to make them one unit. And then we're going to purify them and all their evil and all their bad transgressions we're going to get rid of. And we'll be one nation. We'll be one unified nation, and then we'll be God's nation. I'll be for them as a God, echoing the promise, the vision of Har Sinai, that will be the special relationship. That will be the Am Segula, the treasure nation. V'avdi David, and the descendant. It literally means my servant David, but it means either David will be reincarnated or perhaps more likely the descendant of David. Melech Alehem will be king on them. V'roa echad yiyeh l'kulam, and there'll be one shepherd for all of them. U'mishpata yilchu v'chukota yishmeru v'asuotam, and they'll go in my way, and they'll do the mitzvot, and they'll keep the Torah, and everyone will be together. Let's just pause here for a second. First of all, this is very clear, this prophecy, right? You know, there's nothing really complicated about this. There's a little bit of a question when we're talking about these two trees. Are these two planks that he's holding together? Rav Yaakov Meidan thinks that this is actually like a grafting project, where he's actually grafting them to two trees together. And that would fit with this whole vision of that we saw before, of the bringing back to life and the growth. That when we say eights, do we mean two planks, two luchot, two sort of wood tablets that you're put together that literally shows it, or you're actually grafting trees together? And does it really make a huge difference? Not so much. The imagery is cool, but practically the message is going to be the same. One other thing, we just finished Hanukkah, right? So if you recall, there's a last stanza of Mausor. So the last stanza of Mausor goes like what? Hazob Seroa Kochacha, lift out your strong arm, the carved case of Yeshua, and bring back the and bring close the time for the redemption. The kom nikmatam avadecha, take revenge of the blood spilt of your servants, milama Russia, from the evil nation. Kiar chalano Yeshua in case the me'ara, whatever all the end amon sel shalom. What are the last words? Haken lanu. What are the last two words? Established for us. What are the end words of Mausor? I'll sing it for you. You guys can finish the line. Admon bitzel tzamon haken lanu.
No. Oh.
You guys got to brush up on your Mausor. You have a whole year now. You have 13 months till the next Hanukkah, right? So there are two ways. Either it ends, Haken lanu, ro'eh shiva, the shepherd of 7, which may be an allusion to this. So there's one ro'eh achad, yeah, al kulam, one king for everyone. Why is it of 7? Why of 7? So if you count later on in Yechezkel, the famous prophecy of the bear will lie with the lamb and the wolf will eat whatever. So if you count the animals in there, gar ze'ev im keves, that the wolf will lie with the lamb. Gar ze'ev keves, utzvi im namer yerbats, the deer and the leopard will go together. I forget all the animals in it, but there's 7 animals in that idea. Vinar Katan, and there'll be a little kid that will watch over them, meaning there's 7 animals, a reference to Ezekiel's vision of the end of days, that should happen, that everything should turn out, that all the evil animals and evil actions in the world should become muted, and that we'll have Ro'el Chad, the King David, the descendant of David, will rule all over all of us. Right, so that's one way of reading it. The other explanation, maybe this is how you finish it, which doesn't work with our text, but is another way. Admon Bitzel Salmon Aken Lanu Roim Shiva. The 7 shepherds. Who are the 7 shepherds? That's a really good question. But perhaps part of that is sort of a attack, an anti-Christian polemic, which may be part of what's going on there. And that, in Christianity, they believe there's one salvation and one leader, and that's it. And we're saying, no, we're not waiting for one person, we're waiting for a group of people. Mashiach ben Yosef, Mashiach ben David. Anyways, only half of the way, only one of the versions fits with our text. All right, continuing on. The Yeshua Asher Natati Lavdi, and you'll live and you'll dwell in the land that I gave to Jacob. Asher Yashvu Ba Avo Sechab, that your ancestors dwell there. We should sort of just plaster this to all of our bumper stickers, right? The land that our ancestors lived in going back thousands and thousands of years. V'yashuvu Alehem Hema Ubenehem Ubenei Ad Olam, and you'll all return there, your children, your grandchildren, your great-grandchildren. The David Adi Nasi Lahem Olam, and King David will be the leader of all of them forever. The Karati Lahem Brit Shalom, Brit Olam, and you'll have this peace treaty, this Brit of peace, this Brit forever. Yeah, Otam will be with them. Natali Rabati Otam. And I'll establish them, and they'll multiply there. V'natati et mikdashi b'tochem le'olam, and I will put my sanctuary in their midst forever. V'haya mishkani alayhem, and I will be, and my mishkan, my presence will be with them. V'yiti lahem le'elohim v'hema yulilam. The relationship will be God and nation, God and treasure nation, God and ambassadors of God. V'yodu hagoyim ki ani Hashem. And people will know that I am God. Mekadesh et Yisrael, that sanctifies the Jewish people. Biyot mishkani bisocham le'olam. When my nation, when my mishkan, when my mikdash, when my sanctuary dwells within them forever, then they will be sanctified. That when God's presence is within the Jewish people forever, the nations will know that God too sanctifies the Jewish people. End of the Haftarah. Right? There are no outstanding questions. There are no it's a very straightforward, beautiful Haftarah. Again, another point to just point out, after verse 22, we have Mishkan and Mikdash. the tabernacle and the sanctuary and the temple. Why both of these languages? So it could be that the author just didn't want to use the word mikdash, 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 say that 5 times fast. Mikdash, 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 so many times. It's also possible that all of this is about the unity of the northern and the southern kingdoms. It's important to recognize that the mikdash, the temple, resided in Yehuda, in the tribe of Judah, but the Mishkan resided in the space of Benjamin in the northern kingdom. And so using two places to describe the presence of the Almighty is a beautiful way of also unifying the tribes. And that's the theme of this whole area, is the unity of the tribes. Now, part of what is so special about this is not just bringing them together, but blending their culture. And that becomes a really powerful image of a promise. And I joked about this before, about how fanciful this prophecy is, but actually is beautiful in the progression of Yecheskel. And so what I want to spend a few minutes doing is just situating this in the progression of Yecheskel. We just stated that this is at the beginning of Yecheskel's prophecies of consolation, of redemption. Yeah, Chuck.
Can I ask, I mean, the stick is the stick analogy, but I was thinking, why not take not a vat, can't think of the word, getting old, a pot of oil and label it Ephraim, another pot of oil, and mix the two together, and that would be a thorough mixing. In other words, the stick is not as, it's not going to mix as well as mixing, two vats of liquid together. Did the issue of why the stick, was that ever addressed by Chazal? Am I being clear?
What you mean? Why don't they use some other metaphor?
Yeah, in other words, why did Yecheskel use this metaphor? I could think of better metaphors for the mixing, bringing the people back together and really thoroughly mixing them together.
Like what?
As I said, you have a pot of oil here labeled Ephraim, a pot of oil here labeled Yehuda, and you put them together, and they'll thoroughly mix very, very quickly.
Maybe there's an inference from that they'll be united, but still retain in some degree their own identities.
Yeah, that would be a good reason.
I think. Yeah, please, Lila.
I'm thinking in my mind that by grafting two sticks together, they're alive and they're still growing together. It's a process.
So I am biased to both of what was just said. I think that the image is very intentional, meaning you could use a water and a oil, but that would separate back out. And you could use two oils, but then they sort of just lose their identity. Here, particularly if you take the grafting image, which is very interesting to me, and I think it fits nicely with the verse. They're both growing. They're both not losing their identity, but they're growing into a greater unity of one, using the traits of both of them, right? Well, the new growth uses the DNA. I mean, I'm not an expert in grafting, but uses the traits of both of them, right? That's the beauty of grafting. And I think part of that is, part of the message of the Haftarah, as simple as it is this very, very complicated reality of how you blend cultures, how you blend society. How do you make a society that is, on the one hand, not stifling of one person's identity, and at the same time creates a unity, at the same time creates a unity that's meaningful. Meaning we see that in America all the time. Like there's sort of like a multiculturalism, there are various different names for different ways that we think about American unity. Some of it is thinking about it as our unity is our division, right? What makes us greatest is what makes us different. And we all honor that and we cherish that and we see people where they are. And that is our unity, the fact that we're all different. But that's not the unity that the Torah is talking about here. And that might work for a country like America. It doesn't work for Israel. There's a unity here, and clearly you feel the you read some of these things, we'll all be together, but don't worry, Yehuda will be king, right? And that's God's plan. But you sort of feel the Judean primeness and that tension. But that's part of the miracle of the redemption, is that there'll be a recognition of clarity of what's their role, what role God assigned to who. But that becomes this question of unity of the people, communal redemption, right? And this, I think, where it fits beautifully in the flow of Yecheskel. Because, can you not hear me?
I just lost sound.
Can you hear me? Can everyone else hear me?
Yeah. Let's see.
We can hear you.
Chuck, they can hear me.
Okay, I just heard you now. I'm not sure what happened here.
All right, good. This could have been just an elaborate prank on you, Chuck.
I just saw a flash. Your internet connection's unstable, so that's your meaning mine.
Gotcha. All right. So again, the preceding chapter, the preceding part of this chapter is the dry bones, right? The dry bones is the individual recitation of the northern kingdom, right? These are or of the Jewish people. And so we have these bones that come up and they get relived and they're part of the Jewish people. Well, how do you integrate them? What happens now that you've redeemed everyone? Right? Part of and there's so much, you read this Haftarah and you think about Israel on so many levels. We think about Israel all the time now, but we should always think about Israel. But you read this Haftarah and you just, the miracle of Israel isn't just that it brought all these disparate Jews and saved them as they were dry bones withering where they were, but that it struggles to be a country that is representative of all its inhabitants, of the Ashkenazim and the Spartan, of the Ethiopians and the Moroccans and the Syrians and the Egyptians and the Polish Jews and the Armenian Jews and the German Jews and the English Jews and the Anglo Jews, meaning bringing that all together to create one unity is a really important project. The question is how you do that. And throughout Jewish history, there have been different approaches to that, right? In Israel, there was an attempt to make nusach achid, one nusach, right? Where we take a little bit from here and a little bit from there and a little bit from there. And we make one nusach that will be for all the edot, for all the streams. That actually didn't take off so much. And you can understand why in Israel right now, where there's so many Jews, it's not the biggest deal. You don't want to daven nusach svarts. You walk down the block and you find an Ashkenaz minyan. What about when you're in Gaza and there are 30 people there and or 15 people there and you can't, you're in the army and the minyan's the minyan. So you do whatever you can. Someone sent me a beautiful clip yesterday of a guy laning from a Torah somewhere in Gaza. What struck me was he's laning in like a Yekish, right? From a Sephardic standing Sefer Torah, surrounded by people who are all different Edot. Right, that's our Haftarah, right? And how do you bridge that? That is the challenge. And so Yecheskel, the next stage of consolation, the next stage of redemption, that Yecheskel envisions isn't just that the Jewish people are going to wake back up and come together, but there's going to be a miracle that Yecheskel describes. That part of the redemption is that we'll be able to find that unity, that harmony, that God will make the Jewish people like one nation in the land with one king, all together, that we won't be two nations again, right? That itself is also a miracle. And that becomes, for the first time pretty much in Yecheskel, that the redemption is not just a individual process or a spiritual or religious or physical process of redemption, but a political process, that we're reviving the Jewish people as a nation in its land. They're reviving the Jewish people as a unified nation in its land. And that is one of the remarkable pieces about our Torah as well, which again is, part of why it goes unseen is because it's so easy, right? If it was a little bit more complicated, we had to delve the depths, understand exactly what Yecheskel was saying, then maybe that would be the case. I want to highlight on that note one more piece that I think is just so beautiful. So you have this major schism in Jewish history between the northern and southern kings. And you have someone coming to the street and putting the northern and southern kings together, grafting them together. What? And someone was a prophet who's trying to give a social message. Is it hard to figure out what they mean? Probably not. What does that mean when you say, Yehuda and Yosef should be together again? That we should have Jewish unity. So this moment where the people come to him and they say, Yecheskel, we have no idea what this means, is because just how hard it is to envision that unity. How foreign from concept that is, that could even be possible, right? It almost highlights how incredible this is, even though it's so simple that exists.
Rabbi, I've got a question about the nature of what Yehezkel was prophesizing here. I mean, it's just before the destruction of the first temple. And I know some of the other prophets at the time, when they prophesied redemption, were talking about, the redemption during Ezra's time. But here he seems to be either clearly prophesizing something much beyond that, or else maybe that what he's prophesizing here is what was intended to happen after the return after 70 years.
Is there a question in this, or are you? I think
was he prophesizing something far into the future? If so, why would this necessarily be a consolation to the people who are being exiled, as opposed to something more immediate in their future?
I think two things. One is it's not so clear what Yechezkel was prophesizing for, and what he was prophesizing for didn't necessarily happen to be. It could be that, if it could have happened and it didn't happen, that it will happen in the future. Meaning that there was this challenge. It could be that there was a certain point where Yechezkel was prophesying for his generation, that the people cleaned up their act and started acting a certain way, that X would happen. And then they failed to, and so then we have more of a problem. That's one option. And then it gets pushed to second generation, meaning the next redemption, and not everyone comes back like they're supposed to. And so therefore, that's another problem. And then you have a future date that comes back. So that's one way. I think the other question you're asking is like, what is the merit of a prophecy like this? I think that comes to sort of either it's so far off people's minds, like we just alluded to, that people can't even imagine what like a basic sign like that would say. Or there's a group of people who think that basic unity is not appropriate, which seems to be the case in some of the other prophets. And therefore, Yechezkel is sort of standing up for that. But the reality is that this has been a lot of years like this, right? Imagine, take France, Norway, England. There was a time where that was one country. Not even so long ago, 300, 400 years ago, right? Imagine today, someone said, oh, we have a great idea. We're going to bring the countries of France, England, and Norway back together. Go back to our roots. We're all going to be one country. We're going to write on a stick, on a flag, England, Norway, France. We're going to be one people, ruled by one king, King Charles, right? That's who it is now.
This was before Brexit, of course.
Right. Yeah, Brexit's the whole point, right? The English couldn't even imagine that happening, right? And perhaps that's part of what we're referring to, is this exact sort of difference, right? And so part of the role of the prophecy is even just to set the expectation for the people. What does redemption look like? Even before you go to exile, meaning what's our aspiration? One of the ways we look at tefillah, prayer, is that prayer is a not just a template of what we should pray for, or not just a template of how we pray, but sort of a menu of what we're supposed to pray for, right? Helps inform what we're looking for. So part of this prophecy might be also to highlight that this is what we're striving for, right? It's not, as they say in Hebrew, muvan me'elav. It's not obvious that that should be the case. It could be that many of the Jews of the time said, we're better off without that. Hold on a second. Now the question becomes like, what does that unity look like, right? And I think that's a contemporary question right now in Israel, right? To what extent do we have that unity? What do we give up for that unity, right? It seems like there was a debate. We should give up parts of our nusach for that unity. That ultimately got rejected, right? But this becomes a major question that gets asked. Like, to what extent do we bring unity, right? In this verse, it seems like we blend. We go full into it. We blend. We lose ourselves within the mix. And that becomes part of the question in with the brothers also, meaning how do you bring unity among a diverse tribe of 12 people, 12 brothers, 12 personalities, 12 nations. And I think that is part of the message here of what happened. And again, let me add one more piece. Remember, we are Jews that have gone through not one, but two destructions of the temple. Until this point, as Yecheskel is speaking, part of Yecheskel's message, and this is part of Yecheskel's broad thematic message across everything, that exile is a recoverable experience. That exile doesn't mean the end of it. Until that point, people were exiled, they were gone. The northern kingdoms, the northern tribes, they're done. No one's heard from them anymore. There's no outpost in Assyria where they have, the Cleveland Yeshiva, right? The Assyrian Yeshiva, it doesn't exist, right? The idea that Jews could be removed from the land and still maintain a Judaism and a nationhood and an identity was far into the Jewish people at this point. Part of Yecheskel's global message is that Judaism isn't land tethered, isn't land tied, isn't just connected to the reality of existence in the land of Israel, but actually extends beyond. When we say that, right, that's the whole message of Yecheskel, like from the beginning prophecy, right? Not for right now, but when we get to Shavuot, we'll look at the beginning prophecy. One of the beautiful things of the beginning prophecy is that Yecheskel integrates all different images of God, Assyrian, idolatrous images of God, Jerusalem-specific images of God, Jewish historical images of God, all into the same holistic picture of God. And part of what Yecheskel is trying to hint to the Jewish people is, when you go into exile, don't think that you're done. But your God, the Jewish people, the connection we have with God transcends that. And God can dress as a Babylonian God or an Egyptian God or as a Jewish God. It's all the same God, right? And again, that's one of the big themes over here also. It's not just unity and bringing us together in harmony, but it's Echad. And what? That will be one nation for God, right? It's a twofer. Once we become one nation, then we can be Am Segula, Vayu Lila Am, we're God's nation. God's our king and our Lord, right? And so that becomes part of this piece. But it's important, the mindset. We know the end of Yecheskel's story. Jews can persevere in a situation where there is exile. That is brand new to the people. And that's a paradigm shift. That's part of what Yecheskel's hinting to over here, I believe. We're going to stop here because we're running out of time. But this is a little bit about our Haftarah and the obvious connection to our Parsha. We will not meet next week, regrettably. We will not be next week. My girls are off, and so I will be spending Wednesday with them. So I'm sorry we won't be able to learn together, but there is only one other group of people who I'd love to spend my Wednesday with besides for you, and that is my beautiful girls. So that's what we'll do next week. We are going to do 20 minutes for Israel, from Israel in a moment. So I invite you all to stay. I'm going to pause the recording and we'll start there soon.